Peach Blossom Det. Chapter 20. As Heng Wen slumbered, I sat alone at the table all night. When the day started to break, I went out to the yard to stand for a moment. Then I retrieved cold water, wiped my face, and strolled around. The young servant and maidservants were all panic-stricken when they stepped out of their rooms to see me staring blankly in the yard. They washed me up again, and I took some mouthfuls of the tea that a maidservant brewed. By now, the sky had brightened and Tianchu and Heng Wen got out of bed. I had sent young servant out to the street to buy 2 bamboo steamers of steamed buns beforehand. When they were served during breakfast, Heng Wen's and Tianchu's eyes lit up. Heng Wen reached out with his chopsticks and had a bite. "Delicious," he declared through a muffled voice and a smile. Tianchu brought one onto his plate. "You had them buy these, right?" Heng Wen said to me. "They taste better than the ones yesterday. If you like them, I'll get them to buy again tomorrow morning," I said. Heng Wen immediately smiled in delight. Tianchu looked at the saucer of chili paste on the table. He tentatively picked up a steamed bun and dipped it in the sauce before taking a small bite. "So you can even add seasoning," he exclaimed with pleasure. Heng Wen immediately picked up another one and imitated him. His eyes widened. "Whoa, it tastes a little different now." I could not help feeling amused as I watched them being all so innocent. At that moment, I remembered what had happened last night, and my heart sank once again. Heng Wen looked at me with a frown and asked, "Are you feeling uncomfortable anywhere?" "No," I crinkled up my face in a smile. Holding a steamed bun with his chopsticks, Tianchu, too, blinked at me. After breakfast, Heng Wen said, "The small steamed buns are delicious, but when it comes to the big ones, the ones from the day before yesterday are better." "Still hung up on Third Granny Wang's steamed buns, I see." There was really nothing I could do about this. Every shop had their own distinctive flavor. A pity Third Granny Wang did not sell steamed buns. After voicing his thoughts, Heng Wen said nothing further on the subject and went to feed the fox. I went to the courtyard to bask in the sun. Tianchu had found a book somewhere, and was reading it on the covered walkway. After Heng Wen fed the fox, he stepped out of the small hall and made his way down the walkway toward the backyard. From where I was standing, I managed to glimpse Third Granny Huang, leaning against the back door as she chatted with the cook. Heng Wen greeted her. Third Granny Huang was naturally overjoyed, and her hands trembled as she complimented him for being such a sensible young master who did not put on airs. Heng Wen was all grins as he answered, "This junior is flattered. I should thank you instead. None of the steamed buns I've tried thus far can compare to the ones you gave us. My father and brother love them too." As he spoke, there was no covering the insatiable hunger on his face. Third Granny Huang was so elated she could hardly speak. It was only after a while that she shakily said, "Since the young master loves them, I will bring my old self back and steam some to send over." "Really?" Heng Wen said. "Then I'd be so grateful." I broke out in a sweat watching from the side. If I were to make my appearance now, Third Granny Huang would no doubt grab me to rain praises and compliments for most of the day, so after another look from my side of the moon gate, I wisely walked away. Back at the walkway, the young servant announced that there was a guest at the doors requesting to see me, and this guest was an old woman. An old woman? Was this immortal lord somehow catching the romantic interest of old ladies these days? I entered the hall to welcome the guest, and the young servant led the old lady in. I fixed my eyes on her. She looked somewhat familiar, perhaps the old woman from the marketplace who had gifted Heng Wen and Tianchu their walnuts and peanuts. The old lady curtsied upon entering and introduced herself. "This old one is from the Liu Hu household. Greetings to young Master Song." I invited her to take a seat with some apprehension. We had only met in the marketplace yesterday, and today, she knew my surname, clearly having asked around. She must have come here for a purpose, just one greeting, and my mind swarmed with suspicions as to what that was. Madame Liu Hu sat on the chair and sized up the furnishings in the hall. With a smile, she said to me, "Your house is so exquisitely decorated. You've only just moved, and yet you've tidied it up so well." "Not at all," I answered. "This humble one actually has not put in even a fraction of effort. The credit belongs to all the others." Which was the truth. The old lady continued, "You're really too modest. May I know where you are from?" I could only make something up. "My hometown is in Jiangzhou." "Oh, my," the old lady exclaimed. "Jiangnan is a good place. Do you plan to stay in this city for the long term or the short term?" "We'll see if we can get used to staying here," I answered ambiguously. "If so, we'll stay here for a longer period." "Actually," Madame Liu said, "this city may not be big, but it can be considered prosperous. What's most important is that it's stable. The world isn't at peace now, and the eastern and southern commanderies are at war year in, year out. I heard that the imperial court even recently deployed troops to join forces with the eastern commandery and attack the southern one, destroying several of the southern commandery's cities in the process. The general of the southern commandery was even beaten to death by his own soldiers, who revolted. Living in peace is hard when all is not stable in the world. There aren't many cities in the world like ours where you can live a peaceful and stable life. So in this old one's opinion, since you are already here and have bought a house, why not stay longer?" I followed her lead and nodded. "You're right." What was the old lady's purpose circling the conversation like this? The old lady picked up the teacup from the table and took a sip to moisten her throat before setting it down. With her old pair of eyes, she looked at this immortal lord and asked, "As presumptuous as it is of me, may I ask your age?" What was she asking this for? This immortal lord was 23 years old when I ascended, so I was about to answer 23 when I remembered in the nick of time that I still had two exalted lords who looked to be youths in the courtyard, my sons. So I replied, "Nearly 40. Madame Liu shook her head. "You don't look your age at all. If my old self had not seen the two young masters, then even if you said you were in your early 20s, I'd have believed you." "Well, yes, this immortal lord's face is clearly the face of someone in his early 20s. Madame Liu covered her mouth and laughed. "You are right in the prime of life, and the two little young masters are still young. Have you never ever thought of remarrying?" So, the old lady was here to play matchmaker for this immortal lord. A marriage proposal knocking on my door the moment this immortal lord came to live in the mortal world. Was it really possible that my fate of eternal solitude could be changed? Seeing my blank silence, the old lady continued, "This old one has a wonderful potential candidate here to matchmake you with. There is a fabric store to the north of the city. It's not a big shop, but business is good. The fabrics worn by the wealthy and influential households in this city are all from them. Shopkeeper Feng of the fabric store has a daughter who is 17 this year. Although she's not really a lady from a wealthy and influential household, her dowry is quite generous, and she's a good match for you, looks and character-wise. This old one isn't just matchmaking you at random. Come to think of it, this young lady has had the affinity of meeting you twice already." This immortal lord heard rustling from behind the screen and guessed that Heng Wen and Tianzhu were crouching behind it to listen in. Madame Liu continued, "The first is that the clothes the two young masters are wearing are made by the Feng household's fabric shop. There are still several pieces of clothes being rushed. As for the second encounter, you should still remember it. The lady who bumped into you on the streets yesterday before the rouge shop is young Miss Feng. Is this not a match made in heaven?" I chuckled wryly at that. This matter was quite the curious coincidence, but it was definitely not a match made in heaven. I cleared my throat and explained that I was new here and still unfamiliar with the place. Besides, remarriage was such a major event, so I had to consider it seriously. What's more, young Missy Feng was still young, and I feared I would do her a great wrong if she were to marry into the family to be a stepmother, so we should talk about it again after careful consideration. These were the excuses I used to fob her off. By the time a decision had been made, this immortal lord would have long been taken to the immortal execution terrace. Madame Liu was all smiles as she said, "No rush, no rush. This matter is not urgent. Give it a few days, and my old self will see how it goes after you've mulled it over." After some more prattling, the old lady bade her farewell and left. Before she stepped out, she added, "Shopkeeper Feng also had this old one pass on a message to you. The 2 young masters' clothes are ready and will be delivered at noon." I said my thanks again, and the old lady finally left. I headed back to the hall, and picked up a cup of tea to moisten my throat. The young girl yesterday actually fell in love with this immortal lord at first bump, and her family had sent someone over to propose marriage today. Evidently, I was still as irresistible as I had been in those olden days. Heng Wen and Tianzhi stepped out from behind the screen. Heng Wen looked at me with his black, shiny eyes. "Did that old madam come over earlier to tell you that someone wants to be your wife?" "Yes," I answered. "Is it the one who threw her handkerchief yesterday?" Tianzhi asked. "Nope." Heng Wen wrinkled his nose. "I heard that old woman say that it was the one who bumped into you." "That's right," I admitted. "Immortals cannot marry mortals," Heng Wen said. "I know," I replied. "That's why I stalled by saying we'll discuss it again in a few days. By then, it'd be time for us to go back." A smile spread on Heng Wen's face. "Are we going back to the heavenly court together?" I plastered on a smile. "Yes." Only then did Heng Wen stop asking, and ran off to the small hall to visit Furball. At noon, the Feng's fabric shop really did send a store assistant over to deliver Heng Wen's and Tianzhi's clothes. When the assistant collected his reward, he fixed his eyes on me and sized me up like he was buying meat and picking the cuts. Then he looked at Heng Wen and Tianzhi. In all probability, shopkeeper Feng had sent him here to appraise his potential future son-in-law. I wondered how he would describe my charms when he returned. As the maidservant cleared the table after our lunch, the young servant came to report that there was another guest at the back door who insisted on seeing this immortal lord. I sure was in high demand today. The young servant ushered the person in. It was a delicate-looking little servant girl, dressed as a study attendant. "My lady instructed me to deliver an invitation for tea tasting," she said crisply, and held out a pink, scented letter with both hands. I reached out to accept it, and the servant girl continued, "Could I ask you to please head over to the back door? The person in the carriage outside would like to invite you for a chat." Rather offhandedly, I set the scented letter on the small table, and followed the servant girl out of the back door. A horse carriage draped with satin curtains was parked by the door, and another servant girl stood before it. She bowed to me and said, "Young Master Song, please stand before the carriage. Our lady has something to say to you." So I stood by the carriage curtain. A sweet, delicate voice floated out from the curtain. "This lowly one has come in person to extend an invitation, in the hope that young Master Song will come over to Ziwia Pavilion at dusk today for tea. I wonder if I could possibly ask you to grace me with your presence." A breeze surfed past, not at all like the chilly wind of early winter, but the warm breeze of spring. Since a beautiful woman has invited me, how would this humble one dare to refuse? I replied. The 2 servant girls covered their mouths and tittered. The charming voice on the other end of the curtain said, "In that case, this lowly one shall return to Ziwia Pavilion to light the incense and fine-tune the qin in silent anticipation of your arrival." The horse carriage turned around and left at a leisurely pace. I said my farewell as I saw them off. When I returned to the hall, Heng Wen and Tianzhi were reading that scented letter together. Heng Wen looked up at me. "This says to invite you to Ziwia Pavilion in the evening for tea. The fragrance is so strong. It's the one who threw her handkerchief yesterday." This immortal lord nodded in tacit acknowledgement. I took the pink letter from their hands and tucked it away under the robes over my chest. Heng Wen and Tianzhi were both looking at me. Heng Wen asked, "Are you going?" I yawned. Time for an afternoon nap. Tianchu returned to his chamber accordingly. Heng Wen, however, followed me, taking one step for every one I took. When we reached the door to his chamber, I opened it for him. Take a nap. Heng Wen made a noise of acknowledgement and entered, and I returned to my own quarters. Looking at the empty bed, I sighed. Just as I was about to close the doors, Heng Wen strode in. I asked in an affable voice, "Why aren't you sleeping?" Heng Wen blinked and ran over to the bed. He sat on it and flashed a grin. This bed feels more comfortable to me than the one in my room. At this moment, I felt like a piece of pot sticker suffocating in the wok, sizzling in the oil and stifled by the fumes. It felt terrible. I could only say, "Since you like this room, I'll trade with you. Starting from noon today, you'll stay here, and I'll sleep in yours." Heng Wen, who was pulling the quilt open and nestling into the bed, turned his head to me. "Why? The bed can accommodate both of us, can't it? I can sleep with you here." I rubbed my forehead. It's always a little crowded sharing the same bed. Sleep well. I turned and made to leave. Behind me, I heard Heng Wen getting off the bed. "I get it now. You don't actually like sleeping on the same bed as me." I turned back and looked at his somewhat downcast face, but I held back and said nothing. Heng Wen lowered his head. "I understand. I won't bother you anymore. I'll return to my chamber for my nap." He pushed the quilt back and walked out with his head hanging. I watched him go. The flame cooking the pot sticker was unusually strong, and hot oil bubbled over, searing my heart and insides so that they sizzled. I closed the door, sat at the table, drank 2 cups of tea, then took out Miss Kingxian's handkerchief, looking it over. Could peach blossoms really bloom on the old, wizened tree that this immortal lord had been for thousands of years? When it was close to dusk, I changed into a brand new set of attire and scented it so that both sleeves gave off a delicate, refreshing fragrance. Heng Wen led a group of children into the yard to play, placing bets on the outcome of the game. Tianchu kept a piece of inkstone and a brush close by to play referee and draw on the losers' faces. The children, except for Tianchu and Heng Wen, more or less all ended up with their faces decorated in ink. I informed the young servant and maidservants that I would not be eating dinner at home and could possibly be back late, so they were to take good care of the young masters. With that, I made to leave. Tianchu and Heng Wen were in the midst of having fun, but Tianchu set down his brush and ran over. "Are you going out?" "Yes," I answered. "I have something on." Tianchu made a noise of acknowledgement and asked no further, while Heng Wen turned his head aside to look at me, his eyes flickering for the briefest moment before he lowered it again to continue playing chess. This time, when this immortal lord took to the streets, I was finally a patron taking a leisurely stroll to the brothel, not the baggage-laden person of yesterday. A pity it was getting late. Everywhere on the street, stalls were packing up and shops were shuttering down, while pedestrians came and went in a rush. And at this hour, the young girls from decent families would not be out here wandering around. This made me feel a little lonely. When I arrived at Ziwiho Pavilion, the rouge stall had yet to wind up for the day. The young lad who set up the stall drew back and looked at me, then at Ziwiho Pavilion. Ziwiho Pavilion. An ornate chamber. A tune of yearning. Drinking to my heart's content. Does young Master Song find this lowly one's tune to be still acceptable for your ears? Qingxian pushed aside her chin, inlaid with jade, and smiled at me with tender affection, her ravishing beauty lighting up the entire chamber. "Excellent," I complimented. "Even better than Chang'e from the Moon Palace." Qingxian covered her mouth and gave a charming smile. "Young Master sure is an old hand at coaxing others. Your praises leave me at a loss as to how to respond." With dainty steps, she walked gracefully to me, then rolled up her crimson sleeves a little to lift the wine jar and refill my cup. It was only when the moon was high in the sky that I dragged my half-drunken steps back to the small courtyard. Before leaving, Qing Xian called me Songlang as one would a lover, placed a scented sachet into my hand, and wistfully asked, "Will my husband come again tomorrow?" This immortal lord heaved a long sigh, held her fair, slender hands, and answered, "With a beautiful woman waiting for me, how could I not?" That scented sachet was fragrant, and the wind that stirred in my wake seemed to be infused with its fragrance too. With 2 jars of wine in my arms, I dragged myself back to my room, startling the young servant in the process. He hurried off to prepare hot water, and after stepping out from my bath, I sobered up a little. Although I changed my clothes, the sachet scent still lingered. I initially meant to return to my room and drink 2 more cups of wine to relieve my boredom. Sitting before the bed, I took the scented sachet and handkerchief out together for a look, but without realizing it, I tilted over onto the bed and fell asleep. I opened my eyes the following day to find myself covered with a quilt. The handkerchief was on my chest, and I was still holding the scented sachet. My clothes that I had worn last night were intact too. I got up to shout for the young servant to attend to me as I washed up, only to see a small plate with 2 steamed buns on it set beside the wine jar on the table. The young servant told me, "Master, you fell asleep last night, and this lowly one did not dare to startle you awake, so I merely covered you with a quilt." The little young master. Heng Wen left you these 2 steamed buns while he was having his meal. He refused to sleep and insisted on waiting for you to return to give them to you, but when he brought them over after your bath, you had already fallen asleep. So, he left them on the table and went to bed. I looked at the 2 steamed buns, my heart simmering again in hot, searing oil. And still, all I could say was, "All right, understood." Heng Wen only stepped out of his room when it was time for breakfast. He looked at me, but said nothing as he took a seat at the table. This time around, both Heng Wen and Tianzhu ate quite a lot. Later that morning, Third Granny Huang came to chat with the cook again. As I happened to be strolling in the backyard, I took the chance to thank her for the steamed buns. Third Granny Huang returned several "You're welcomes" my way, then launched into a conversation. "Gentleman Song, I heard you intend to marry shopkeeper Feng's daughter? It's truly a good marriage. Miss Feng is a renowned beauty in our city, and she's able and virtuous. The 2 of you are a perfect match made in heaven." Baffled, I could not help but ask, "This matter was only briefly brought up to me. The rest is not true at all. Where did you hear these rumors?" Third Granny Huang sized me up and down. With a smile, she said, "The whole city knows of this. Don't tell me you have still yet to send betrothal gifts to Miss Feng." I promptly broke out in a cold sweat. Betrothal gifts? I had only been in this city for a few days. When did I get this far? After lunch, Tianzhu obediently went to take his afternoon nap. I was just about to return to my chamber when I saw Heng Wen carrying the fox from the small hall to his room. In his present form, carrying the fox must be quite strenuous. I walked over, and Heng Wen looked up at me and smiled. "It looks quite pitiful sleeping alone in the small hall, so I'm taking it back to my room." I sighed and stroked a handful of Furbal's fluff. "At least it'd be warm with it on the bed." Heng Wen nodded and made a sound of acknowledgement, then gladly busied himself with carrying the fox into his room. I stood for a while outside his closed doors. After all, it was because it had saved Heng Wen that Furbal had ended up in this state. In any case, there were only a few days left. At least sleeping together would be some sort of comfort for it. When night descended, I was back in the ladies' bedchamber in Zihuo Pavilion, listening to Qing Xian playing a tune. After a song, Qing Xian spoke softly and gently as she sat beside me, pouring me wine. The candlewick burned and crackled. Qing Xian pulled out a golden hairpin and picked it. The charred snuff. Holding the cup, I looked at the light and could not help but sigh. Hearing the exhale, Qing Xian slowly got up and moved over to sit by the stand that held her chin. She tuned the strings and played a mellow tune that was bitter and lingering, like a woebegone young maiden in autumn. When the last of the lingering notes came to an end, Qingxian smiled at me, and made her way back to where I was. As she walked through the shadows cast by light, she turned aside seemingly without realizing it and lifted her sleeve, as though wiping away tears. When she turned back, however, her face still wore that same smile. As she bent over to pour the wine, I looked at her and asked, "What has made this beauty before me so heart-stricken?" Qingxian immediately said with a smile, "Young master, you jest. I was merely blinded by the candle smoke when I passed under the lamp. On the contrary, it is the young master before me who is courting errant thoughts. For what reason could you be sighing the autumn away?" I said, "Never destined for each other and yet meeting though it was never meant to be. High is the bright moon in the sky, within sight but far beyond reach." Qingxian covered her mouth. "How melancholic and heartbreaking! I wonder which beautiful woman the young master is pining for with such anguish." I heard that young master Song was still new to the city when love came knocking, and you'll be marrying the young miss of the Feng household. How could you hold such forlorn yearning? No doubt the people in this city were all very well informed. "Miss Qingxian is a peerless beauty rivaled by none," I said. "All the romantic youths and the rich, distinguished patrons splurge fortunes just to spend a night with you. So why are you still shedding such sorrowful tears?" Qingxian lowered her head and sighed softly. "Young master, why tease this lowly one? I make a living by selling my smile and myself. Social status and standing, they are all merely make-believe. I'm just like the merchandise from the stall that belongs to whoever can afford to pay the price, regardless of who he is." Her voice trembled a little at the end of her words. Qingxian looked up and forced a smile at me. "My momentary lamentation has put a damper on your fun. Young master, please do not hold it against me. I'll play another tune for you." I let loose a long sigh. "If you are in any difficulty, just go ahead and voice it out. It's better than bottling it all up. I may even be able to help you somewhere." Qingxian was inexpressive as she stared at me, biting her lips. Then all at once, her face was all but obscured by her sleeves. 2 trails of tears streamed from behind her hands as she sobbed, "Young master, please let me play a tune for you. After these few days, I might no longer be able to. The nephew of Squire Zhang, who presides over this city, has already told the madam that he'd redeem my freedom. His uncle's 66th birthday is in a few days, and when the time comes, he will give me to Squire Zhang as a present. I. At this point, she dissolved into sobs. And my heart came alive with compassion. There were many things in the world one was powerless to do anything about. When all was said and done, there really was no distinction between heaven and the mortal realm. I stood at her side with a sigh, and said in a gentle voice, "Don't cry. I'll help you think of a way." Trembling, Qingxian raised her head to look at me. Then she threw herself into my arms and bawled. When I left Ziweo Pavilion, the front of my clothes soaked in tears, the streets were already empty. Somehow, the small stall selling rouge was still open, and the young lad who watched it was sitting at the roadside with his hands in his sleeves, staring blankly at nothing. Presumably, he was waiting for passing Ziweo Pavilion patrons to buy some boxes for the courtesans inside. Was there anything easy to do in this world? Not making a living, for sure. Once more, I returned to the small courtyard at midnight. After helping me wash up, the young servant yawned and went off to bed. Left alone under the lamplight, I did not feel sleepy. I looked at the 2 jars of wine on the table, took one, made my way to the yard, where I downed several mouthfuls. It was silent all around, and the cold wind was chilling to the bone. After tonight, I was one day down. I heard a voice behind me ask, "Why aren't you sleeping?" A look back revealed a tiny figure standing before me. To my surprise, it was Tianchu. I was confounded for a while before answering. I couldn't sleep, so I came out to stretch my legs for a bit. Tianchu's clear, bright eyes flicked to my hands. I lowered my head and saw the wine jar. Letting out a dry laugh, I said, "Oh, this is fine wine in the mortal world. I fear I won't get to drink it after returning to the heavenly court, so I want to drink more while I can." Tianchu looked quietly at me, apparently taking my word for it. I set the wine jar down by the rockery, then removed my outer robe to wrap around him. "This wind is freezing. You should go back to your room as soon as possible and sleep." Have I been injured recently?" Tianchu suddenly asked. I gave a start. Was Tianchu about to recover? Without thinking, I blurted, "You are now in the mortal world, so this is just a momentary discomfort. Once you return to the heavenly court a few days later, it will all come back to you." Tianchu made a sweet-tempered sound of acknowledgement and returned to his chamber to sleep. Before he left, he looked at me again. "You should rest early too." I watched his retreating back. These few days, I never saw little Tianchu without Heng Wen at his side. I had sensed nothing different. But the sight of him and him alone tonight, and his retreating figure, I somehow felt a sense of déjà vu. It was as if I had seen this figure many years before. Perhaps it was because he still bore many similarities with the grown-up Tianchu, and that was what gave me a sense of familiarity. I scooped up the wine jar again and downed mouthful after mouthful until it was empty. It was still quiet all around, and the night breeze, still as chilly. I treaded lightly to Heng Wen's chamber and ducked in. As expected, the fox was sleeping under Heng Wen's quilt. Sensing my entry, it immediately burrowed out and leaped to the ground. With a flick of my fingers, I put it to sleep and placed it on a chair. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at Heng Wen's sleeping face, wondering how many more days I still had left to look at him like this. I tucked him in. Touching his face gently, I could not but whisper, "Heng Wen, please recover your original form before I am sent to the immortal execution terrace, even if it's only for one day, or even one night." I put the fox back in its place, tucked the quilt tightly around Heng Wen, and left. I returned to my chamber, where a lone lamp flickered in the infinite stretch of silence. I fanned out the light and went to bed. I overslept and woke only when the sun was high in the sky. The young servant told me that the young masters had gone ahead and taken their breakfasts, and were now both in the yard. I acknowledged his words and hurriedly finished my meal before strolling out to join them. Heng Wen was rolling dice with a company of youths, and they seemed to be playing for keeps with copper coins at stake. Heng Wen had already won a pile that lay before him, and the group looked disgruntled at the loss. Tianchu, on the other hand, was sitting at the stone table, which had been set with a brush, inkstone, and paper. His head was bent as he wrote something. I went over for a look. Spread out before Tianchu was a book, and beside it stood a stack of paper choked with densely written characters. It looked as if he was copying it. I picked up a piece of paper for a look. The Analects of Confucius? "This looks like homework the teacher assigned," I blurted in astonishment. Tianchu raised his face a little and nodded. I don't know how to play dice, and I lost earlier. They said they didn't want my money, but then they asked me to help them with their private school homework. Their teacher fell sick a few days ago and paused classes. Once lessons resume the day after tomorrow, they'd have to hand it in, and they can only play with us after their homework is done. So you just copied everything? I thought. These children really took their teacher for a fool. None of them would get off lightly once they handed in a stack of homework in only one person's handwriting. Seized by impulse, I picked up the stack of paper and flipped through only to be thunderstruck by what I saw. Of these papers, some were written with skewed and crooked strokes, some were scrawled with a flourish, some were dainty and compacted. They were not written in a single person's handwriting. I looked again at the piece Tianchu was in the midst of completing. It was in yet another kind of handwriting that was squarish and upright, with distinct edges and corners. "These are all written by you?" I wondered in astonishment. Tianchu stayed his brush and nodded. Yet, I had each of them write a few words for me, but I don't know if my imitation is spot on. Having said that, he lifted his brush and resumed writing. The page was filled up in no time. Tianchu set down his brush and handed the paper to me so that I could add it to the stack. Taking it, I was struck by this inexplicable sense of familiarity again, as if this scene, too, had occurred before. Perhaps it resembled the sight of Tianchu inscribing books and paintings back in the heavenly court? Perhaps in response to this immortal lord visibly losing myself in my thoughts, Tianchu looked at me questioningly. I replaced the paper in the stack, and strolled away. Seeing me linger at Tianchu's table probably pricked the consciences of Heng Wen's company of youths. As they played, they snuck timid glances at me. Heng Wen tossed his newly earned wealth onto the ever-growing pile before him and said, "Don't be afraid. He won't tell your teacher." The youth's eyes swiveled toward me, and I said with an affable smile, "I won't tell on you." The youths were promptly delighted, as if they had been granted an amnesty, and shouted "Thank you, uncle" sweetly, like their mouths were coated with honey. Those few shouts of uncle, however, really evoked a medley of feelings in this immortal lord's heart. After several rounds of continued losses, their faces turned a ghastly shade of green. The pile of copper coins before Heng Wen became a considerable heap that must have contained the entirety of the boy's snack savings. One of the youths lowered both his head and the dice. "I'm not playing anymore." Heng Wen stretched lazily. "That's so? Then let's call it quits." He picked up the dice and returned them to the bowl, then pushed forth the copper coins before him and grinned. "Take your money back quickly. Careful not to get short-changed." The youths were all momentarily stunned. Surprisingly enough, they had enough integrity left to remain standing in place. One of them flushed red and stammered, "He who concedes defeat when he loses a bet is a real man. Since we've lost to you, then it is how it is." Heng Wen smiled. "It wasn't stated that we would be betting money when we played. We were merely counting copper coins to keep score. These copper coins were always meant to be returned. Since you want to talk about winning and losing, how about this? If I win again after I join the school, all of you will help me copy my homework." "Okay." The youths blinked and nodded, then immediately swarmed over in delight to return their coins to their pouches. But once that was done, they dawdled, unwilling to leave. "Want to play something else?" one of them hemmed and hawed. "Eh? Didn't you say earlier that you weren't going to play anymore?" Heng Wen asked. The youth said with a cough, "I was talking about dice. How about a game of chess?" Heng Wen nodded. "All right then." So, he set up a chess game and slaughtered them all again. I simply returned to the covered walkway and set up a chair to watch the show from afar. In the days of my own childhood, I would skip out on homework and play the day away with my classmates or cousins. Consequently, I had received my fair share of the rod from my old man. It was all very fascinating to think back on after all these years. The youths played until lunchtime before reluctantly leaving, their completed homework in hand. The young servant said to me, "Master, the food is ready in the kitchen. Would you like to have it now?" I nodded. "Serve the lunch." Heng Wen ate quite a lot, especially the fried eggplant. I made to rearrange the dishes and move the plate closer to him, but Heng Wen held it down with his chopsticks and said, "No need for that. I can reach it. Or you can also pick some out for me." So I picked up some food from the dish and delivered it to his plate. He uttered his thanks. Tianchu, on the other hand, ate less than he had the previous days. In fact, he had eaten less than half of his rice. "Eat a little more," I urged in a kindly tone. "You haven't tried these stir-fried bamboo shoots the kitchen made today. Try them." Tianchu picked up his chopsticks and sampled some dishes. To my surprise, he eventually finished his bowl of rice and even drank half a bowl of soup. I was delighted. After the meal, a maidservant came forth to clear up the table. I knew Heng Wen was thinking about feeding the fox, so I bade her bring the scrambled egg over. Heng Wen said, I told the kitchen to replace it with stewed chicken chunks. It should be tired of eggs after being fed the same thing for the past few days, so there'll be a change of taste today. I petted him on the head. Then, a change of taste it is, I said. The stewed chicken chunks came in a large bowl, soup and all. Worried that Heng Wen might lose his grip on the bowl and scald himself, I personally helped him carry it to his room. The fox was lying in the chair, squinting as it waited for Heng Wen. I set down the soup bowl. Once it's done eating, you should rest for a while too. Got it, Heng Wen answered. I returned to my chamber and made my plans to visit Zihuo Pavilion this afternoon. As I did, I gave in to temptation, taking out King Xian's handkerchief and scented sachet again. A gust of wind blew through the door I had forgotten to close earlier. I looked up in time to see Heng Wen striding into the hall, his eyes on the objects in my hands. I hurriedly set them down. Why aren't you resting? I thought I'd come over for a look. I'll go back for my nap later. Heng Wen walked over to the bed and picked up the scented sachet to heft it in his hand. How fragrant! I took it from his hand. You should go back and sleep. Heng Wen looked at me with a smile. Are you going to see her again this afternoon? I had the self-awareness to know that it was not appropriate to mention this sort of stuff before young Heng Wen, so I gave an ambiguous answer, I have some urgent matters to attend to. Heng Wen gave an "oh" before following up with a yawn, then you should take a nap. I'm sleepy, so I'll head back for one myself. Having said that, he turned and left. I followed him to the door and watched his retreating back. His door closed with a creak, and only then did I close my own with a sigh. End chapter.